He looked me in the eye and said, "Kneel." At first, I thought he was joking. No father ever expects to hear that from his own son. But the silence that followed was cold and absolute. His wife stood nearby, her lips curling into a smile that made my stomach twist. And there I was, on my knees in my own home, feeling every ounce of love I'd ever given them turn to dust beneath their laughter. That moment didn't just break my pride, it broke something sacred between us. What they didn't know was that the house they mocked me in still carried my name on every brick, and I would reclaim more than walls. I would reclaim my dignity. Before we dive into today's story, I recommend you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. If you enjoy this video, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 to let me know how I can make better content for you. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. The mornings in Boise always smelled like pine and diesel, a mix of nature and hard labor that never left my bones. I still woke before dawn, though retirement had stripped away any reason to. The old percolator on the counter hissed its rhythm, a small defiance against silence. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one Margaret and I bought back in '89, and listened to a construction crew, somewhere down the street, hammering steel into the cold. It was a comforting sound, proof that somebody was still working. I spent 35 years as a union electrician. I'd wired schools, hospitals, even a prison once. The scars on my hands were little blueprints of that life, and though my knees hurt like hell every time the weather shifted, I liked to think they were medals. After Margaret passed 7 years ago, I learned that quiet can be heavier than concrete. The insurance payout sat in my account untouched until Evan and his new wife Sloan decided to settle down. Evan always had ambition, the kind that looked good on paper, but made people tired in real life. When he and Sloan found that shiny new house in Meridian, I felt proud and scared at the same time. The numbers didn't add up, not for a young sales manager still paying off student loans. So I stepped in. $150,000 for the down payment, notarized as a family loan secured by a second deed of trust. It sounded safe, formal, like something that would keep love and business from bleeding together. But Sloan cried happy tears, and Evan hugged me harder than he had since high school. That was enough. The monthly mortgage was steep, so I set up an automatic payment from my pension to help them for the first 2 years. That was my promise. Temporary, responsible, loving. 2 years passed, then 3. I never shut it off. Each month, the deduction hit like a small apology I didn't remember owing. Their house was beautiful, I'll give them that. Bright walls, open kitchen, the kind of home that looked like a catalog instead of a place where real people lived. Every corner screamed Sloan's taste, neutral tones, gold accents, fresh flowers arranged by a service. I noticed once that Margaret's framed photo, the one that used to sit on Evan's old dresser, was gone. Sloan said it didn't match the palette. I said nothing, but something in me sank, like a breaker tripped in the dark. My own place, a small rental near the foothills, carried no shine but plenty of truth. A sagging recliner, a cracked window seal, the faint hum of an old Ford parked out front. It was enough. I'd drive that truck to their house on weekends, bringing tools, helping patch fences or install shelves. Sloan filmed everything for her page, DIY moments with Dad. I was background noise, the kind people scroll past. Evan had his mother's blue eyes but none of her stillness. He moved fast, talked fast, spent fast. Every time I mentioned slowing down, he'd joke that I didn't understand the new economy. Maybe I didn't. What I did understand was that money, once it starts replacing gratitude, poisons faster than whiskey. Hank Mendoza, my old union buddy, liked to remind me, "Dan, money ain't love. It's just leverage with better packaging." Still, I couldn't stop. I told myself it was what Margaret would want. Help the boy until he's steady. In her old ledger, tucked between grocery lists and electric bills, she'd written in red ink, "Help, if it's secured. Love, if it's earned." I read that line often, but ignored the warning like it was meant for someone wiser. Small things began to sting, Sloan correcting my grammar in front of guests, Evan calling me sir instead of dad when his coworkers visited. The night he asked me to call before dropping by so we don't ruin Sloan's filming schedule, I nodded, smiled, and felt a crack open inside that no wrench could fix. Hank invited me fishing the next weekend, but I declined. "They're throwing a housewarming," I said. "It's important I be there." He sighed. "Just don't bring your checkbook." I laughed, but he wasn't joking. That night, I ironed my only decent shirt and placed Margaret's picture on the dresser. "Let's hope he remembers who built his first roof," I whispered. The pine wind rattled the window, and somewhere beyond it, I heard the echo of nails being driven into new wood, strong, precise, final. If you're still watching and felt that sting of betrayal hit a little too close to home, drop a number 1 in the comments to let me know you're with me. Something's about to shift, and trust me, you won't see it coming. Sunday nights used to mean family to me. When Margaret was alive, the house smelled of roast chicken and rosemary, and Evan would steal biscuits from the oven before dinner. I thought about those days as I parked in front of his new house in Meridian, a place so polished it looked like it had never known the chaos of real living. Sloane's voice drifted from inside, sweet and commanding at the same time. She was filming, of course. She filmed everything. I carried Margaret's apple pie in both hands, careful not to crush the crust. It was her old recipe, the one Evan used to beg for every Thanksgiving. I figured it might warm the atmosphere. When Sloane opened the door, she greeted me with a wide influencer smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Dan." Perfect timing. We're about to start filming our gratitude dinner. Her perfume was thick, floral, expensive. The house glowed with artificial light. Inside, the dining table was dressed like a magazine spread. Gold chargers, crystal glasses, napkins folded into perfect fans. A ring light stood beside the table, humming softly like an insect. Evan appeared from the kitchen, holding a bottle of wine. "Dad," he said, clapping me on the back. His tone was pleasant, but his shoulders were tight. "Glad you could make it." I handed him the pie. "Brought this for dessert. Your mom's recipe." He looked at it, half smiling. "We'll see if it fits tonight's menu." Sloane's curated something special. Curated. That word stuck like a splinter. I sat down as Sloane adjusted her camera, checking angles. "This one's for our followers," she explained, glancing at me. "We're calling it Building the Perfect Life, Family Edition." She laughed lightly. I didn't. Dinner started with small talk that felt rehearsed. Sloane bragged about brand deals and her growing audience. Evan talked about work stress and keeping up with the housing market. I listened, nodding in the right places, trying to ignore how everything they said revolved around appearances. When I mentioned how proud I was of the house, Sloane smiled too brightly. "Yes, it's such a blessing. We worked so hard for it." Her emphasis on "we" landed like a hammer. Wine kept flowing. Evan's cheeks flushed. I thought it might be a good time to mention that I'd soon be turning off the automatic mortgage payment. "You know," I said carefully, "you're doing great on your own now. Maybe it's time." "Dad," Evan interrupted sharply, setting down his glass. "Can we not talk about finances tonight?" His voice carried an edge I hadn't heard before. Sloane laid a hand on his arm, smiling for the camera. "Don't be so serious, honey. Your dad's just proud of us." "Proud? Yes," I said slowly, "but it's also about responsibility." Evan cut me off again, louder this time. "We're fine, Dad. You just signed some papers. It's not like you built the house yourself." The words hit harder than they should have. Sloane's camera was still recording, pointed right at me. She laughed nervously and said, "Lighten up, Dan. It's all love here." But I could see in her eyes that she loved the drama more than the peace. The rest of dinner passed in silence, except for the clinking of silverware and the occasional shutter sound from her camera. The pie I'd brought sat untouched on the counter, while Sloane served a tiny store-bought cheesecake for the video's dessert aesthetic. When it was over, I stood up and said I needed to get going. Evan followed me to the porch, wine glass still in hand. "Dad," he said, Try not to bring up money around Sloane anymore. It makes her uncomfortable. I looked at him under the porch light, and for the first time, I saw not my son, but a stranger who'd learned to speak a language I'd never understand. Understood, I said quietly. The drive home was long and silent. I didn't turn on the radio. My reflection in the windshield looked tired, older than my 62 years. When I walked inside, the house greeted me with its familiar emptiness. I poured myself a cup of leftover coffee, cold and bitter, and sat at the kitchen table. The latest bank statement lay on the counter. The payment to Meridian Home Loans had cleared, right on schedule. I traced my finger over the numbers, each digit a small insult I had willingly funded. Margaret's ledger sat open beside it. I reread her handwriting for the 100th time. Help, if it's secured. Love, if it's earned. I picked up my pen and wrote one short note underneath her line. Stop payments soon. The clock ticked in the corner, marking seconds that suddenly felt heavy with decision. I closed the ledger, whispered to the quiet room, not yet, but soon. If you're still watching, and you can already sense that uneasy silence before the storm, type number 2 below so I know you're following every move. Things are about to take a sharp, unexpected turn. 2 weeks passed before I heard from them again. I told myself I wouldn't go back to that house, but Sloane called on a Thursday afternoon, her voice sweet as syrup. Dan, could you drop by this weekend? Evan needs your help with something important. I hesitated. There was a pause long enough for her to add, it's about the mortgage. He just needs clarification. That word, mortgage, snapped my attention. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Saturday arrived gray and windless, the kind of still day that feels like a warning. I drove to their house without turning on the radio, the silence heavy as steel. When I parked, their front yard looked perfect as always. Clipped hedges, fresh mulch, everything sterile and staged. But the house was too quiet. Evan was pacing the living room, his jaw clenched, while Sloane sat at the kitchen table with a tablet in her manicured hands. Glad you came, she said without looking up. We wanted to show you something. I stepped closer, and the screen came into view, my stomach turned. It was the video from the Sunday dinner, the one where Evan cut me off mid-sentence. They'd edited it into a 2-minute clip titled Family Gratitude, Generations Learning Respect. It had over 50,000 views. The comments stung like acid. That old man looks lost, still paying for his son's dreams. Embarrassing. I felt heat rising in my chest. Take it down, I said, my voice low but steady. Evan scoffed. Dad, it's just content. It's not that deep. It's my life, I snapped. My humiliation? You made a show out of it. Sloane smiled thinly. People loved it. Authenticity sells. You should be proud you're inspiring engagement, I turned to Evan. Is this what you've become? You sell your own father for likes? He slammed his palm on the counter. You think you're better than me because you paid some bills? You've been controlling my life since day one. I gave you a chance, Evan. That house exists because of me, he laughed bitterly. Because of you? No, Dad, because of me. I work every day to keep it running while you sit around judging. You can't handle that. I don't need your money anymore. Then stop taking it, I said quietly. Something in him snapped. He was drinking. His breath reeked of whiskey. You know what? Maybe you should show some respect. This isn't your house anymore. Sloane leaned back, watching the chaos with a gleam in her eye. Evan, maybe he should apologize. Symbolically, for disrespecting us. What? I said. She tilted her head. Kneel, Dan. Just for a moment. It'll show our followers that family hierarchies can evolve. Generational healing. Her words dripped with mock sincerity. I turned toward the door, ready to leave, but Evan blocked my path. Do it, he hissed. Show her you respect our home. I won't. He shoved me once, then again, harder. Get down! His voice cracked into a shout. Sloane lifted her phone, recording. This is real emotion, she whispered, her tone thrilled. The next thing I knew, I was on my knees. My legs ached, but I stayed still, staring at the polished tile floor. He barked something, nonsense about respect, gratitude, manhood, but I barely heard him. Time stretched. 10 minutes, 15. The weight of humiliation pressed into my spine, but behind it, something colder was forming, not rage, precision. When he finally stopped yelling, I rose slowly, hands trembling. "You done?" I asked. Evan's chest heaved. "Maybe now you understand." I looked at him, really looked. The boy I'd raised was gone. In his place stood a man hollowed out by pride and fear. "I came here as your father," I said quietly. "I'm leaving as a stranger." I walked past him, past Sloane's smirk, and out into the fading daylight. My truck's door groaned as I pulled it shut. For a long moment, I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, watching the reflection of their house in the rearview mirror. It looked perfect, still, unreal. That night, I didn't answer Hank's call about fishing. I poured a shot of bourbon, stared at my shaking hands, and opened the drawer where I kept my documents. The folder was still there, the deed, the trust note, the authorization for the mortgage payments. I read the lines until the words burned into my mind. Payment Authority, Daniel R. Whitaker. I underlined it in red ink. Then I said the words aloud, slow and calm. "You want control, son? Let's see how you live without mine." If you're still here and the tension's got you holding your breath, comment number 3 below so I know you're still in this with me. What happens next will change everything. The morning after the humiliation, I woke before sunrise, the way I used to before long shifts on winter job sites. The air was sharp, the sky a dull silver. My knees ached as if they still remembered the tile floor from the day before. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of black coffee and the folder of documents spread open like a map of my mistakes. Each page carried a signature, a number, a trace of trust I'd given away. I didn't want to look at myself in the mirror. The reflection I'd see wasn't the man who'd built a home, raised a son, or survived 35 years in the Union. It was a man who had knelt because his son told him to. I took a deep breath and forced my eyes back to the paperwork. My name appeared again and again. Daniel R. Whitaker, the sole holder of the payment authorization. The mortgage ran through my pension account. Without me, the house stopped breathing. I underlined that line in red. Then I closed the folder, showered, and drove downtown. The local branch of Boise Federal Credit Union sat between a bakery and a dentist's office. The smell of fresh bread mixed with the sterile chill of winter air. Inside, the lights were too bright, the kind of light that shows every wrinkle, every line of worry. Laura James greeted me at the counter with the same kindness she always had. "Morning, Dan," she said. "Haven't seen you in a while." "Been busy," I replied. "Need to talk about an account adjustment." She led me to her office, where framed photos of her grandkids smiled from the wall. I handed her my documents. "I have an automatic payment set up for a property," I said. "Hypothetically, if I pause it, what happens?" She looked at me carefully, reading between the lines. "Well," she said slowly, "if the authorization holder stops payments, the account closes on our end. The mortgage company will notify the primary resident immediately. So they'd know?" "Yes," she said, "within a few days." I nodded, my fingers drumming against the desk. "Good to know." Hypothetically, she gave me a sympathetic look but didn't pry. "You want me to prepare the paperwork just in case?" I smiled faintly. "Yes, ma'am, just in case." When I stepped outside, the cold wind bit through my coat, but it felt cleaner somehow. I walked to my truck and sat there for a moment, watching people move through their lives. A couple arguing over coffee, a teenager hurrying to work, a mail carrier whistling in the distance. Everyone carried invisible battles. Mine just had a title deed attached. On the drive home, memories came uninvited. Evan as a kid, sitting on my shoulders during the 4th of July parade, the two of us fixing a leaky roof together, him laughing when the hose sprayed us both. I had loved that boy more than I loved breathing. Somewhere along the years, that love had turned into dependency, not his, but mine. I'd built my world around the idea that he needed me. The truth was, he didn't, and now he'd made sure I remembered it. That night, I called Hank Mendoza. We met at the diner near the foothills, the one with sticky counters and perfect coffee. Hank was already there, stirring sugar into his cup. He looked up, reading my face like a blueprint. "So, you gonna tell me why you look like you buried someone?" I told him everything. The dinner, the video, the kneeling. His spoon froze mid-stir. "Jesus, Dan," he whispered. "You need to report them." "No," I said quietly. "Not the police, not lawyers. They'd twist it. Make it another story for her camera." "So what then?" I sipped my coffee. Silence, the kind that costs. Hank leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "You're gonna hit him where it hurts, huh?" The bank. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The next morning, I walked back into Boise Federal. Laura was waiting with the forms. "You sure?" she asked softly. "I've never been surer," I said. I signed the cancellation. The next payment was due in 4 days. "Perfect timing," I murmured. Walking out, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: control. Not joy, not revenge, just the quiet steadiness of a man who finally stood upright again. That night, I wrote a letter to Margaret in her old ledger. "I finally stood up again," I wrote. "I think you'd understand." I sealed the letter inside the folder and placed it on the kitchen table. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows like applause. "Tomorrow," I whispered, "the silence begins." 3 quiet weeks passed before the first ripple reached me. A letter from Boise Federal arrived, confirming the cancellation of my automatic transfer. I didn't even open it. I just slid it into my desk drawer and went back to my coffee. Outside, the air had the brittle chill of early spring, cold enough to remind a man he was still alive. I'd expected to feel guilt by now, but all I felt was stillness, the kind that comes after a storm when the debris finally settles. Across town, that stillness was turning into panic. I learned later how it began. The envelopes stacking up at their perfect white door, each stamped payment overdue. At first, Sloan laughed it off. "Some system glitch," she told Evan. But when the red final notice arrived, the color drained from her face. Evan's office called him in that morning about a credit issue. He came home furious, his voice echoing through their manicured kitchen. "We're delinquent," he shouted. "How the hell did this happen?" Sloan blamed me, of course. She claimed I must have accidentally canceled something. She called me 5 times that day, her messages alternating between fake sweetness and thinly veiled threats. I let every call ring until it went silent. By the second week of silence, Sloan's Instagram posts turned cryptic. "Some people pretend to support you until they destroy you," she wrote under a photo of their half-empty living room. Comments poured in, sympathy, outrage, drama. She was feeding her audience again, building a new story. The betrayal of the century. Then one evening, as the sun bled out behind the foothills, headlights cut across my driveway. I didn't need to see the car to know. I stayed seated on the porch, coffee in hand, watching as Evan slammed the door so hard it shook the hinges. He was holding a wrinkled envelope, red letters glaring from the top. "Why'd you do it, Dad?" His voice cracked halfway between fury and panic. "Why would you stop the payments?" "Because it was never my debt to carry," I said. Sloan followed behind him, her phone already raised, recording. "He's proud of it," she said, voice dripping venom. "Look at him. He thinks ruining our lives is justice." I kept my eyes on Evan. "You're almost 40 years old. A man should stand on the floor he built, not the one his father paid for." "Stop with the philosophy," he snapped, waving the overdue letter in my face. "You're going to make us lose the house." "It was never your house," I said quietly. "It was a loan, a kindness, and you mistook it for ownership." Sloan scoffed. "You think this makes you noble? You'll be a monster online by morning. I'll make sure of it." "Then film," I said. "But this time, tell the truth. Respect isn't content." Her hand trembled slightly. Evan's face flushed red. "You can't just walk away, Dad," he said. "You made a promise." "I made a choice," I corrected. "And I'm done paying for my own humiliation." He stepped closer, his grip tightening around my arm, just like the day he forced me down. But this time, I didn't move. Let go, I said, steady and low. Before it could escalate, Hank's old pickup turned onto the gravel road. He'd been on his way over to drop off fishing gear and must have seen the commotion. He jumped out, voice booming. "You better step back, Evan." Evan froze, recognizing the warning in Hank's tone. His hand dropped, and for a moment he looked small again, like the boy I'd once lifted onto my shoulders. Sloane swung her phone toward Hank. "Mind your business, old man." "It is my business," Hank said evenly. "You humiliated him once. Don't try it again." For a second, no one spoke. The wind carried the faint smell of sage, dry and clean. I turned back to Evan. "The day you made me kneel, you lost the right to my help," I said. "The mortgage was mercy. Now it's math." He looked like he wanted to shout but couldn't find words. Sloane lowered her phone, realizing the footage wasn't going the way she wanted. "You'll regret this," she said coldly. "We'll sue." "For what?" I asked. "For paying my own bills?" She spun on her heel and stormed back to the car. Evan lingered for a heartbeat longer, shame flickering across his face. Then he followed her, tires spitting gravel as they sped off. When their headlights disappeared, the night settled again. I sat back down, picked up my cup, and took a long sip. The coffee was cold, but victory never needed to be warm. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was earned. "Let the house speak for itself now," I murmured to the dark. And for the first time in years, I smiled. A week passed after that night on the driveway. No calls, no messages. The silence I'd once prayed for now felt heavier than noise. I filled the hours fixing the porch steps, trimming the overgrown hedge, cleaning tools that didn't need cleaning. The house was spotless, but inside me there was clutter, questions I couldn't sweep away. Word around town traveled faster than I liked. Meridian wasn't big, and folks loved a story. I overheard pieces at the hardware store, how Sloane's influencer empire had cracked after her family drama video backfired, how Evan hadn't shown up for work in days. People asked if I was all right, and I smiled, said, "Doing just fine." But the truth was murkier. Justice had a bitter aftertaste. Hank showed up one afternoon with a sack of groceries and that look that meant he wasn't leaving until we talked. "You planning on starving yourself?" he asked, setting the bag on the counter. "Just not much appetite lately," I said. He poured coffee for both of us and sat down. "I saw Evan," he said finally, "at Murphy's Tavern. Looked like he's been sleeping in his car." I said nothing. "Dan, he's falling apart. Maybe it's time to throw him a rope before he drowns." I looked out the window, watching a crow land on the fence. "Sometimes drowning's the only way a man learns how to swim." Hank sighed. "Maybe. But if he doesn't come up for air, you'll have to live with it." After he left, I stood at the kitchen sink for a long while, listening to the faucet drip. The sound reminded me of nights when Evan was little and afraid of thunderstorms. He'd crawl into our bed, clutching my arm. "You'll keep me safe, right, Dad?" he'd whisper. I always said yes. Now, I wasn't so sure what safety meant anymore. A few days later, a letter arrived from the mortgage company, addressed to Evan but delivered to me by mistake. I slid it open before realizing what it was. Notice of foreclosure. The words glared like a wound. I held the paper for a long time, tracing the seal with my thumb. The silence of the room pressed on my chest. That night, I opened Margaret's old box again. Her handwriting, steady and looping, filled the yellowed pages. One line stopped me cold. "Mercy isn't weakness. It's remembering you once needed it too." I read it 3 times before setting the letter down. Was I being merciful or just proud? I made a fire in the stove and sat staring into the flames. Pride had always been my armor, but it had turned heavy, dragging me down the same way Evan's arrogance dragged him. Maybe we were more alike than I wanted to admit. The next morning, I called Hank. "You ever wonder," I said, "if teaching someone a lesson sometimes teaches you the wrong thing?" He chuckled softly. "You thinking of undoing it?" "No," I said, "but I can give him a chance to stand." "Then you know what to do." After we hung up, I took a sheet of paper and wrote a few words in my neatest handwriting. Evan, if you want to talk, I'll be here Sunday morning. Alone. Dad. I sealed it in an envelope and walked it down to the mailbox. The flag clanked as I lifted it. As I walked back, the sky was turning amber, the color of endings. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind moved through the trees outside like a restless spirit. I imagined Evan in that big empty house, Sloan probably yelling, the walls echoing with everything they'd built on someone else's dime. Maybe now he understood what real silence sounded like, the kind that follows when the world stops believing your version of the story. Before dawn, I poured myself a cup of coffee and stood by the window. The mail truck came early, tires crunching on the gravel. I watched as the driver picked up the envelope and drove off. My reflection in the glass looked calm, almost unfamiliar. This time, I whispered to myself, the kneeling's up to him. The words hung in the air like a prayer, not for revenge, but for release. If you're still watching and your heart's pounding with what's coming, hit number 4 in the comments to let me know you're feeling it too. The calm before the reckoning is almost over. Sunday morning came gray and slow, like the world hadn't decided whether to start the day or let it fade. I woke early, the habit of an old man who no longer needed an alarm. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood. On the counter, I brewed 2 cups of coffee, one for me, one for him. I set them both on the table. His chair, Evan's, was across from mine, the same one he used to occupy when he'd visit after college, bragging about new jobs and city life. Back then, his voice filled this house with promise. Now, the silence filled it instead. I waited. 7 o'clock. 8. By 9, the second cup had gone cold. Rain began around 10, tapping gently against the windows, then building into a steady rhythm. I sat through it, telling myself he might still come, but by noon, I knew he wouldn't. Some lessons take longer than mornings to learn. I poured the cold coffee down the sink, rinsed the cup, and stood there for a long time watching the water swirl away. For all the satisfaction my silence had once given me, now it felt like a punishment I'd sentenced myself to. Across town, his world was crumbling. I knew because Meridian was small, and small towns carry stories like pollen. Sloan's family betrayal post had backfired spectacularly. Brands pulled their contracts. Followers mocked her crocodile tears. The perfect image she'd spent years curating shattered overnight. People were calling her manipulative, fake, cruel. Evan's job was next to go. His boss reportedly called him in to discuss a financial reliability issue, a polite way of saying his missed mortgage payments had tanked his credit. Within days, he was suspended. The house that once gleamed with expensive decor was now filled with boxes. I pictured them arguing, blame bouncing between them like bullets. Sloan left first, took her car, her camera gear, her designer bags, and vanished. Evan stayed behind, probably hoping she'd return, but I knew better. Some people love only while the lights are on. That Tuesday, I got a call from Laura at the bank. "Dan," she said gently, "we need you to sign off final disassociation papers. Since your name's still tied to the original contract, we'll send a representative to verify your release." When the young bank rep came by that afternoon, he looked barely old enough to rent a car. He handed me a clipboard, all business. "Once you sign these, sir, your financial liability ends." "Good," I said, signing neatly. My hand didn't shake this time. After he left, I took the stack of old mortgage letters, receipts, and copies of automatic payment forms out to the backyard. The rain had stopped, but the ground was damp, soft. I built a small fire in the rusted pit I used for burning yard waste. The papers curled, blackened, and turned to ash, rising into the air like ghosts leaving for good. I thought that was the end of it, until that night. Headlights washed across my living room wall. For a moment, I assumed Hank had come by, maybe to check in. But when I stepped to the window, my chest tightened. It wasn't Hank. It was Evan. He stood in the rain, drenched and exhausted, a single duffel bag at his feet. His shoulders were slumped, his face pale. I hesitated before opening the door, not out of anger, but fear fear of what I'd see in his eyes. "Dad," he said softly. His voice was rough, like he'd been shouting or crying. "I messed up." We stood there for a long moment before I stepped aside. "Come in." He sat at the kitchen table, dripping onto the tile. I handed him a towel, then poured a cup of coffee, the same cup I'd poured that morning, still sitting by the sink. He told me everything. The foreclosure notice, Sloan leaving, losing his job, the debt collectors. He couldn't even look at me when he said, "You were right. I thought control made me strong. Turns out it just made me stupid." I wanted to say something comforting, but the words wouldn't come. Part of me ached for him. Another part remembered my knees on that cold tile. "What do you plan to do next?" I asked. He looked at his hands. "I don't know." "You can stay the night," I said finally. "One night. Not forever." He nodded. "Thank you." After he showered, I gave him dry clothes and a blanket. He fell asleep on the couch within minutes. I stepped outside onto the porch. The rain had stopped, leaving the air smelling like wet pine and dirt. The stars were dim, but present. Maybe this was what starting over looked like. Not forgiveness, not forgetting, but standing on new ground where pain had already done its work. Morning came soft and gray, the kind that made everything look washed clean. I woke to the faint clatter of dishes from the kitchen, and for a second, I thought it was Margaret. Then I remembered the night before. Evan, the duffel bag by the door, the exhaustion on his face. He was standing by the counter now, barefoot, trying to figure out my old coffee maker. The smell filled the house, rich and steady. I watched him for a moment before speaking. "You're using too much coffee," I said. He startled slightly, then smiled weakly. "Guess I forgot how you do it." "3 scoops," I said, "not 5. He adjusted, pouring some grounds back into the tin. It was such a small thing, but it felt like the first time in years we'd shared something normal. He handed me a mug, and we sat at the table in silence. The same table where he had once thrown words like knives. After a few minutes, he said quietly, "Thanks for letting me stay." I nodded. "You needed a roof." He stared at the cup in his hands. "I don't know what to do next, Dad. The bank's taking the house. I'm broke, no job. I messed up everything." I looked out the window. The sun was trying to break through the clouds, but not quite making it. "Starting over doesn't mean forgetting," I said. "It means working harder for peace than you ever did for pride." He didn't respond, but I could see the words sink in. The days that followed unfolded quietly. Evan stayed a week, helping around the property. The fence behind the garden had sagged over the years, and together we replaced the boards, the smell of cedar filling the air. He fixed the loose shingles on the shed roof. Every nail he drove seemed to anchor him back to something real. We didn't talk much while working, but sometimes silence says what words can't. At dinner, I'd cook simple meals, stew, cornbread, fried potatoes, and he'd clean the dishes without being asked. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was movement. One afternoon, Hank pulled up in his truck and found Evan hauling wood to the porch. The 2 men exchanged an awkward handshake. Hank nodded, not unkindly. "Glad to see you putting in some work, son," he said. After Evan went back to the yard, Hank turned to me. "You did the right thing," he said, "but don't mistake pride for peace. Let the boy earn his way back." I nodded, knowing he was right. Mercy without boundaries becomes permission, and I wasn't about to start that cycle again. That evening, Evan and I sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the pines. The sky burned orange, fading to violet. Crickets hummed in the grass. He spoke suddenly, his voice raw. "I was awful to you." I didn't answer. He went on. "You didn't deserve it. He broke off, shaking his head. "I wanted to feel powerful for once. Sloan said that's what real men do, take control. But all I did was lose it. I let the words hang between us. Finally, I said, 'You can't rewrite what's done, but you can live better than it.'" He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "I want to." We sat for a while after that, saying nothing. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and soil. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked, and the sound felt like part of the world again. The next morning, he told me he'd applied for a job at the local hardware store. "It's nothing big," he said, "but it's a start." "Work's work," I said, "and starting small's better than not starting." He smiled faintly. "You sound like Mom." That one hit harder than I expected. I didn't reply, just nodded, and handed him a second cup of coffee. Later that day, I helped him draw up a simple budget. No loans, no shortcuts, just math and discipline. When he looked at the list, he laughed under his breath. "Guess this is what adulthood's supposed to look like." "It always was," I said. That night, after he went to bed, I sat by the window. The porch light flickered across the damp yard. For the first time, the house didn't feel haunted by loss. It felt alive again, like it was breathing with both of us inside it. I whispered to myself, maybe mercy wasn't about saving him. Maybe it was about saving what's left of me. If you're still here and that glimpse of redemption has you holding on for more, type number 6 in the comments so I know you haven't blinked. What comes next will test every bit of strength left. A month passed before the final envelope arrived. It was thick, official, stamped with the bank's insignia. Inside was confirmation. The foreclosure had been finalized, the mortgage closed under Evan's name alone. My name was gone from the paperwork, erased like chalk washed off a blackboard. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, running my finger along the embossed seal. There was no satisfaction, no triumph, just a calm, steady quiet, the kind that feels earned, not given. That afternoon, I drove out toward Meridian, along the same stretch of road that used to feel like obligation. The house came into view at the top of the hill, stripped of its glory. The lawn had gone wild, weeds claiming the perfect edges Sloan once boasted about online. A crooked for sale sign leaned against the mailbox, one of its corners missing. Through the window, I saw faint outlines of cardboard boxes and dust-covered furniture. I didn't stop. I just slowed down long enough to take one last look. Every nail, every shingle, every wall inside that place had once been paid for by love disguised as help. But love without boundaries turns toxic. I pressed the gas and drove on, leaving the house to its new ghosts. Back in town, Evan was building something smaller, but stronger. He'd moved into a one-bedroom apartment above Miller's Hardware, right on Main Street. The place wasn't much, just a small living room, a mattress on the floor, and a single window that faced the alley, but it was his. I stopped by one afternoon, pretending I needed sandpaper. The store smelled of sawdust, oil, and honest sweat. Evan stood behind the counter, wearing a name tag and a faded work shirt. His posture had changed, straighter somehow, not defensive, just grounded. When he saw me, his face softened. "Hey, Dad," he said quietly. I nodded. "You got the place running smooth?" "Trying to," he said with a half smile. "It's strange, but I like it here. Feels real." I bought a roll of tape I didn't need and waited while he counted the change. Every movement he made seemed deliberate, careful, like he was trying not to waste anything anymore. When he handed me the receipt, I said, "You're doing good work." He shrugged, but there was pride behind it. One day at a time. Outside in the parking lot, we lingered. He told me he had started counseling through a local church and hadn't touched a drink in 3 weeks. He also said he had talked to Sloan once. She'd moved out of state to start over. "I don't hate her," he said, "but I don't miss her either." "That sounds about right," I said. For the first time in a long time, the silence between us didn't ache. It just was. That evening, back home, I found Margaret's ledger still on the table where it had sat for months. The pages had started to yellow at the edges. I opened it to the familiar line I'd read so many times. "Mercy isn't weakness, it's remembering you once needed it too." I took a pen and wrote beneath it, my hand steady. "And dignity isn't cruelty, it's knowing when to stop carrying what's not yours." I closed the book, placed it in my desk drawer, and for the first time since her passing, I didn't feel the urge to open it again. 2 days later, another envelope came from the bank. It was short, simple. A final notice confirming all accounts connected to the loan were permanently closed. No balance, no responsibility, no ties. That evening, I walked out to the backyard and lit a small fire in the pit. I fed the letter into the flames and watched it curl and blacken, the ash lifting into the soft evening air. But this time, it wasn't anger or revenge I felt. It was release. As the fire dimmed, I sat on the porch steps and listened to the quiet hum of life returning to its rhythm. The crickets, the distant laughter from the neighbor's porch, the faint rumble of cars coming from town. One of them would be Evans, heading home from the hardware store, maybe humming along to the radio. I smiled faintly and whispered into the golden air. We both finally paid what we owed. The sun slipped behind the trees, casting the yard in soft orange light. For the first time in a long while, the world didn't feel divided between debt and forgiveness. It felt even, balanced, and in that balance I found peace. The morning light poured softly through the pine trees, touching everything with gold. The air smelled of wet soil and lilac from the bushes that had just started blooming again. Spring had come quietly this year, no sudden rainstorms or heavy winds, just warmth returning little by little. I stood on my porch with a mug of coffee, the same mug Margaret used to use, its paint chipped on one side. It was early, not yet 7, and the only sounds were birds, the distant murmur of the stream behind the house, and the faint creak of my rocking chair. I realized it was the first time in years I'd woken up without a single worry pressing down on my chest. For months, life had found its rhythm again. The fence was fixed, the shed repainted, the vegetable garden alive with green shoots. I'd stopped keeping track of time by what was owed and started marking it by what was growing. There was peace now, not the kind you wait for, but the kind you build, plank by plank, with steady hands. After breakfast, I carried a few young saplings to the far end of the property where the sunlight hit strongest. Each one had to be planted deep enough to survive the winds that would come in fall. As I dug, I thought about how roots work, how they spread unseen, anchoring quietly, never showing off. Maybe that's what strength really looked like, the part that doesn't need to be noticed. I was patting down the last mound of soil when I found something small and metallic half buried near the shed. I brushed the dirt off and saw that it was Margaret's old keepsake tin. I remembered it faintly. She used to keep tiny things in it, buttons, postcards, recipes she meant to try but never did. I carried it to the porch and opened it carefully. Inside were a few dried petals, a faded photo of the two of us at the county fair, and a folded piece of paper. Her handwriting had lightened with age, but was still hers. Forgive without forgetting, love without surrendering. I sat there for a long time with that note in my lap. Margaret had always known how to distill entire lifetimes into one sentence. She'd carried wisdom like other people carried breath, effortlessly. I smiled, realizing she'd left me her final lesson years before I was ready to hear it. Around noon, the mail truck came rumbling up the gravel drive. The carrier waved and handed me a single envelope. It was from Evan. I hesitated for a moment before opening it, half expecting another apology I wasn't sure I needed. But this letter was different, short, steady, written in a cleaner hand than I remembered. Dad, I just wanted to let you know I'm doing all right. The store's been good to me. They made me assistant manager last week. I've paid off most of my debts. I volunteer at a shelter on Saturdays. Turns out I'm pretty good with repairs. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know I'm okay. There was no pleading, no guilt, no shadow of old manipulation. Just a man trying to move forward. I folded the letter and slipped it into Margaret's tin beside her note. For the first time, their two voices, the past and the present, felt like they belonged together. That evening, I took my fishing pole and walked down to the stream. The water moved slowly, catching the sunlight in silver ribbons. I hadn't gone fishing since before Margaret passed. The ritual felt both familiar and new. The line, the patience, the quiet. As the hook bobbed gently in the current, I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to hold everyone together, about the nights I'd stayed awake replaying old arguments, wondering what I could have said differently. But peace doesn't come from rewriting the past. It comes from stopping the fight against it. The fish never bit that evening, and I didn't mind. I wasn't really there to catch anything. I was there to sit still and remember that stillness was enough. A few days later, Hank stopped by with his grandson, a boy no older than 12. They had been driving through town, and Hank decided to drop in. "He's been wanting to learn how to fish," Hank said, nodding toward the boy. "Figured you were the best man to show him." I smiled and handed the kid one of my old rods. He gripped it awkwardly, the reel spinning too fast, the line tangling instantly. Hank started to scold him, but I raised a hand. "Let him figure it out," I said softly. "That's half the fun." We spent the afternoon by the stream, sunlight shimmering off the water. The boy laughed every time he cast too far or too short, and the sound filled the air with something I hadn't heard in a long while: pure, unguarded joy. Watching him, I thought of Evan at that age, before pride hardened him, before I mistook providing for guiding. When the boy finally caught his first fish, he shouted like he'd won the world. I helped him unhook it carefully and let it slip back into the current. Hank clapped him on the shoulder, grinning. I just stood there, content to witness a moment that didn't belong to regret or revenge, only renewal. As the sun dipped behind the trees, I stayed by the water a while longer. The stream kept whispering its endless song. I thought of Evan in his small apartment, Margaret's note in her tin, the trees I'd planted that morning. Everything somehow was still connected. "Life will test you," I murmured, watching the water flow past. "It'll break you, take from you, but what you rebuild after the breaking, that's what defines you." I reeled in my line and looked toward the house, the light in the window glowing soft and warm. My house, my peace, my dignity, built with my own hands. And this time, no one could take them away. There comes a point in every life when the noise finally fades, the blame, the guilt, the hunger for vindication, and what remains is something quieter, purer, and far more difficult to earn: peace. It doesn't arrive suddenly, nor does it come from victory. It's the slow realization that we cannot control how others choose to love, to betray, or to change. We can only decide what to carry forward and what to finally set down. For years, people confuse forgiveness with weakness and anger with strength. But the truth hides in between. Forgiveness isn't surrender, it's discipline. It's the conscious act of refusing to let pain dictate the rest of one's story. Anger, on the other hand, feels like power at first, but it burns fast and leaves only ashes behind. There's no wisdom in fire that consumes everything. It's in the embers that continue to warm even after the flames have gone. Life has a way of teaching lessons in the hardest language possible. It takes everything from you, your home, your pride, your illusions, and then asks who you are without them. For many, that question is terrifying, but for those willing to face it honestly, it becomes a doorway. On the other side of loss is not emptiness, but clarity. What once seemed like the end becomes the beginning of something truer, quieter, and stronger. Dignity isn't something others can give or take away. It's something you reclaim every time you choose not to let cruelty define you. True dignity is silent. It doesn't shout, doesn't demand recognition. It lives in small, steady choices, in the calm refusal to respond with venom, in the courage to walk away from what poisons the soul, in the patience to rebuild a life with clean hands. Peace, too, isn't a gift. It's work. It's found in the mundane details of ordinary days: the coffee poured at sunrise, the soil turned in a garden, the sound of wind against a porch railing. It's the rhythm that returns when the heart stops fighting against the world. Peace is not forgetting what happened. It's remembering without letting it wound you anymore. In time, even the sharpest pain dulls to something softer, like a scar that no longer aches but reminds you of how far you've come. Every wound carries the potential to harden or to heal. Those who choose healing discover something remarkable: that survival isn't enough. Renewal is the real triumph. To rebuild yourself after being broken, that is the quiet revolution of the human spirit. We live in a world that measures worth by control, but the truest measure of strength lies in release. Letting go isn't giving up. It's trusting that you've done enough, learned enough, and loved enough to move forward without bitterness. The past cannot be rewritten, but it can be redeemed when you stop reliving it. And so the journey ends not with thunder or applause, but with stillness, the kind that hums with understanding. Life continues, seasons turn, and from the wreckage of what was, something new always begins to grow. That is the unspoken miracle of endurance, the ability to find beauty in the aftermath, to stand in the ruins and still see sunlight breaking through. In the end, the story is not about loss, revenge, or even justice. It's about reclaiming the quiet power of self-respect. It's about choosing to build rather than burn. And it's about realizing that sometimes the most profound victories are the ones no one else can see, the ones that happen silently in the space where anger used to live, replaced by something far greater: peace. These turning points remind us that setting boundaries and valuing ourselves is not just an act of courage, it's the foundation of living with dignity. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one lesson from this story that you feel connected to, and how will you apply it in your own life? Let's grow together by sharing our thoughts. If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, feel free to leave a 0. Your feedback helps us improve. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and spark reflection. Thank you for watching, and here's to living life with strength, honesty, and authenticity.